Hi, this is Jason Evert. I'm the founder of Chastity.com and host of the podcast Lust is Boring. Welcome to the Pints with Aquinas Catholic Apologetics Conference. Today, I'm going to be addressing the topic of homosexuality and how do we explain this in such a way to maybe our friends, colleagues, family members who may experience same-sex attractions in such a way that's not going to alienate them from the church. Or maybe if you're an individual experiences same-sex attractions, how can God's plan for human sexuality, in your case, lead to a life of fulfillment and peace and joy and authenticity? So I think when it comes to apologetics, one of the challenges we face when talking about the subject of homosexuality is, the word apologetics comes from a pair of Greek words, apologia, meaning to give a word from a particular position. But I think when it comes to the topic of homosexuality, just trying to give a word from a position isn't always the best approach, because you think if you need to explain purgatory to a Protestant or you got to explain the existence of God, you want to line up your mental arguments and try to be able to pull out this Bible verse or that case or whatever. But when it comes to homosexuality, I think the most important kind of arrow in the quiver isn't so much our words, it's our ears. To actually learn how to listen to these individuals instead of trying to come up with a perfect case for why that lifestyle is unethical or this or that. We've got to learn how to receive a word rather than simply deliver one. Because I think when it comes to homosexuality, those who experience these attractions by the world are led to believe that there's only really two options in their life that they can choose from, right? You can either choose gay pride or you can choose gay shame. So basically live in a closet out of fear that if anyone knew you had these feelings, they'd hate you, or, come out of the closet, embrace your attractions as your identity, forget about God, the church, and the Bible, do whatever you want with your body. Gay pride, gay shame, what's your pick? Now, for a lot of people, they might feel kind of conflicted or stuck in the middle. It's like, well, I don't want to throw away God, but why should I live in shame of something I never chose to begin with? Will people hate you for having these feelings? Yeah, some people will. You see them on TV. They got their protest signs, God hates gays. I'm like, no, God hates your stupid sign. But the problem is fanatics like that will make everybody believe that if you believe in traditional marriage, you're just nothing but a hateful, homophobic bigot. In fact, I remember speaking to a priest once, and he told me at his Catholic high school, he said, all the kids at my school are pro-gay for the same reason they're pro-life. They just think it's mean not to be. And that is essentially the full extent of their convictions. I remember another Catholic school teacher telling me that class was having a debate on gay marriage, and the teacher said, okay, look, I want to write down everybody's arguments on the boards. Over here, we're going to put emotional arguments, and over here are the intellectual arguments, and both of them are valid. Emotions are part of the human person, so is the intellect, and so they're both valid, but we just want to make sure we're putting certain arguments in the right spots, just to see where they're at. And so all the kids gave all their reasons for why gay marriage should be okay, and the intellectual side of the board was completely vacant. It had been entirely filled on emotional arguments of fairness and things like that. And so when it comes to filling out that side of the board in terms of intellectual arguments, I want to take a look at what I think are a couple of useful things to be able to bring up when it comes to discussing this issue. I think one of the most important ones is the topic of identity. That a person's sexual attractions are not their identity. If anyone in the world defines their identity by their sexual attractions, life is going to get pretty confusing real fast. Because if I'm attracted to a woman who's not my wife, is that my identity? Am I an adulterosexual if I experience those attractions? If I see a pornographic billboard, I think she's pretty. Am I a pornosexual? Is that the deepest truth of my identity? No. So if you experience homosexual attractions, your identity is not, like Facebook would say, you could be either G or L or B or T or Q, or in fact, Facebook has over 58 genders you can identify as. Not that sexual attraction is a gender in and of itself, but are there really 58 different types of persons out there? The Catholic Church would say no, that there's actually 3 different types of persons. Now, a person, Boethius's classic philosophical definition of a person is an individual substance of a rational nature. Boil that down a little further, a rational being. So how many different kinds of rational beings are there? Well, there's 3. There's divine persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's angelic persons, the holy angels and the fallen angels. And then there's human persons made male and female in the image and likeness of God. And that's it. And so if you're a human person who experiences homosexual attractions, your identity is not gay, lesbian, or bi. Your identity is that you are a beloved son or daughter of God the Most High. This is the deepest truth of your humanity, of who God created you to be. And this is so important, I think, because a person's behavior flows from their identity. And if I think my identity is my sexual attractions, I'm going to think my very personhood is being stifled if I'm not able to act that out in a genital way. And so Mother Teresa understood this well. In fact, I was friends with a priest who lived with Mother Teresa in Calcutta for some time. And he shared with me that apparently once she was getting interviewed by the media on a host of different hot button topics, and the issue of homosexuality came up. And when they mentioned it, she said, "Well, I don't like the word homosexual." The media is probably like, "Oh, Mother Teresa hates gays too." And she said, "No, for the rest of the interview, I would just ask that you refer to them as friends of Jesus." And they're like, "Okay, so with regard to the friends of Jesus here in Calcutta," and for the rest of the interview, she held them to that this is the deepest truth of their identity. Now, to this, some people may say, "Okay, well, fine and good, great, I'm a friend of Jesus, I'm a son of God," but where does this really leave me, though? I mean, basically, do I have to obey the church and live a life of desolation, repression, loneliness, and misery, or disobey the church and go to hell? Is that pretty much the menu choices for me? In fact, I read of one man who went through this dilemma, and here's what he said. "A lot of people in my position feels like religion presents them with a choice between death by damnation or death by desolation. But what I would say to someone in that position is this: start by coming to God and his church and just take it from there. The truth is that doing things that please God does not result in a life of desolation." And I think, as surprising as this might sound, the Catholic Church is actually not forbidding same-sex couples to love each other. Catholic Church is pretty much the only institution standing that is actually encouraging same-sex couples to love each other. Now, this might sound jarring, but it's because the world's idea of love is in great need of redemption. The world tells you, sex equals love, and if you can't express love in a sexual way, then your ability to express love is being taken away from you. But what's missing from this is the fact that abstinence is often a profound expression of sacrificial love. A high school boy who won't sleep with his girlfriend because he wants to do what's best for her, his abstinence is an expression of love. A husband on a business trip away from his wife, well, that night his abstinence will be an expression of his love and fidelity. And likewise, when he comes home and she's burnt out and tired of the kids, again that night, probably abstinence as an expression of his love for her. Our priests, our religious sisters, their life of celibacy is a gift of self. That abstinence is an expression of love for God and souls. But I think the world has a hard time grasping this because the world has kind of over-sexualized everything, from our Doritos and cheeseburgers to our identity has got to be over-sexualized. Our relationships, even the friendships, are getting over-sexualized. And to me, the real key is this, and this needs to be pointed out, especially to young people, that attractions in themselves are being hypersexualized. All over the world, students will come to me and say something like, "Jason," a girl will say, "I'm really confused because, look, I think I'm straight, but my friends think I'm a lesbian, but so I'm concluding I'm bi, and I'm trying to figure it out." And I'll say, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, the guys in my school, they're really perverted and gross, and they kind of grope you in the hallway, and they're just so immature. But there is a girl on this campus, and I don't know, I come alive in her presence, and we can talk for hours on end, and she's beautiful and funny and smart. My friends are telling me this is a girl crush, so we should experiment together and see if that's what's there, but I don't know what to think." And I told her, "Look, I don't know if no one's just not told you this before. You're supposed to be repulsed by everything repulsive. You're supposed to be attracted to everything attractive. So your friend there, her wit, her charm, her beauty, doesn't that all draw you to her?" She said, "It does." I said, "Look, I go to a Bible study. There's an 85-year-old man in our class with this gigantic beard, and I'm completely attracted to that guy. His sense of humor, his wisdom, I just want to be around the guy." Because guess what? Not every human attraction is a sexual attraction. This girl's eyes just lit up. And she said, "I've never thought about it like that before. That makes so much sense." Now, obviously, it isn't always cut and dry, and some people do experience sexual attraction as members of the same sex. But the point is that not all our attractions are just sexual. In fact, I knew one man who lived a promiscuous gay lifestyle for years, and afterwards said, "You know what? I finally realized, after all this hooking up with guys and the apps and everything else, I realized I wasn't homosexual." He said, "And in my eyes, I realized I was homo-emotional, longing for the affection, the admiration, the approval, the attention I just never got from my dad. And the world kind of taught me to sexualize my problem." And so I think what we got to understand is that attractions themselves, and and I need to be careful here that I'm not going to imply that, if you experience homosexual attractions, you were probably sexually abused. If you experience sexual attractions, you probably have a horrible relationship with your dad. No, you can't take that kind of cookie cutter approach to human attractions because they're as unique as the human person themselves. But we've got to be able to step back. And some people say, well, look, some attractions, though, are sexual. I mean, what does the church say about those people? That they basically have to live alone their whole life? Is the church that bigoted and unfair? I mean, does the church hate them? Why is the church homophobic? I mean, what about marriage equality? Isn't love love? Let's give some responses to these things. Okay, first, love is love. In philosophy, this is called, or in linguistics, it's called a tautology. It means it says nothing. You've really not moved any further by simply repeating a word and putting an equal sign between it. You're not making a case. Slogans are not substitutes for sound arguments. And so love is love means nothing. Move on. Homophobic. I don't like the word homophobic because I think words really need to mean something. I mean, if I'm afraid of enclosed spaces, I'm a claustrophobic. If I'm afraid of wide open places, you're agoraphobic. If I kill every spider that comes in my house, am I an arachnophobic? Not necessarily. If I don't have an inordinate fear, I just don't want them on my property, doesn't mean I'm an arachnophobe, right? But how come when it comes to the topic of same-sex attractions, if we simply disagree on what marriage is, names start getting thrown at each other, homophobe, this, that. But to me, if we call people names, we've either run out of good arguments or we've run out of charity, or we have run out of both. And so name calling isn't going to get us anywhere. If an act is an act of hatred and bigotry, I mean, call it for what it is, but don't call people names. And so that's the homophobia thing we got to take a look at. Marriage equality. Do you believe in marriage equality? Nobody really does. In fact, next time someone says to you, why aren't you in favor of marriage equality? Just tell them, I don't think you're in favor of marriage equality. And they'll say, well, but of course I am, because everyone should have a right to love. And then you could say, okay, well, I want to marry two women, and they want to marry me. Are you open to marriage equality for our relationship? And they'll say, well, no, marriage is between, two people. You can't have three. And then you could push back and say, like, really? Are you going to actually legislate against my private romantic relationship as if what we do in the privacy of our own home is going to somehow destroy the institution of marriage? I mean, seriously, like, what is so magical about the number two? Like, you really think you can have love as a couple, but we can't have it as a throuple? I mean, if you say that two men or two women can raise a kid as good as a man and a woman, then how come a man plus two women can't do an even better job? And you'll see you could almost emotionally bully someone into caving in on what marriage is. And so even if you were to, concede the point and say, okay, fine, I agree, it's got to be between two people, but I want to have an open marriage with this person where we mutually agree to have other sexual partners than one another to keep kind of the flame alive in the relationship. Are you okay with that in our marriage? Most people would say, well, no, exclusivity is part of an essential element of a marriage. You can't just be monogamish, okay? You have to be monogamous. And so, okay, I'll concede the point, we need to be monogamous. But permanence, that's kind of restricting. Instead of wedlock, why don't we kind of have a wed lease, right? Where instead of a lifelong commitment, it's more of like a 10-year contract. And if things are going well after a decade, well, we renew. And if not, no hard feelings. People say, no, permanence, exclusivity, monogamy, these are essential characters of what marriage is. But then you could give me one more case. Okay, well, let's say I'm married and she and I are tired of each other and we found other people that would just make us happier. Are we not free to divorce and marry somebody else? Jesus says that if you do this, that you're actually committing adultery. And so you see in all these cases that I've just presented to you, do you hate these people? No? Well, then why won't you let them marry each other? What you realize is that, no. All of those people are free to marry, but the problem is they don't want to enter into what a marriage is. It's not about may they marry, but can they marry? It's not a matter of, permission. It's a question of possibility, which brings us down to the core issue here, which is what is marriage? Is marriage simply an institution invented by human beings? Well, it has been around for, ages and ages. And the reason why is because it's an institution that legally binds a father to his offspring. Because when a woman gives birth, she doesn't have much of an option but to be present at that event. She can't really opt out. Well, I don't feel like showing up on Tuesday. It's kind of mandatory. But the husband, on the other hand, or the partner, can bail out. So I have deadbeat dads. And because fatherless families tend to fare so poorly on a whole range of mental and physical health outcomes, it's always been seen that it's best for the family for that kid to be raised in his biological mother and father's household, and marriage helps to make that happen for the well-being of civilization. So that's kind of why the world has had marriage. But from the church's perspective, marriage isn't so much what two people do. They exchange vows and live together and love each other. Marriage is more so, in the church's eyes, about what two people become, meaning a visible image of Christ's love for the church, a visible icon even of the inner life of the Blessed Trinity, this communion of life-giving love. Where you look at Jesus, he left his Father in heaven, his mother on earth, to give his body to his bride, so that his bride might have his life within her. And this is exactly what a husband does for his wife. And so they make visible this invisible love of God on earth. And so when the two become one flesh, they consummate their union. But marriage is not consummated by two people doing something sexual. I know it might seem like, well, isn't the church kind of singling out same-sex couples? Actually, no here. In fact, if a husband and a wife were to engage in the same acts that two women were to engage in sexually, they would not have consummated the marriage. The church would say that marriage has not been consummated and it is not indissoluble because it has not been consummated. Likewise, if a man and a woman engage in the acts that two men could engage in, the church would say that act has not been consummated. The marriage has not been consummated, for the two have not become one flesh. Same thing would go with contraception. If a couple contracepted all their acts of intercourse, the church would say that not only is that marriage not indissoluble, but it might not even be a valid marriage if they closed off all of those acts into the natural ordering of the transmission of life. And I'll take it one further. You look at impotence. Now, we got to clarify, infertility is when you're struggling to get pregnant. Sterility is when you can't get pregnant. Impotence is when you're incapable of the sexual act. And the church does teach that if a man and woman, one of the two, are impotent, that they are not able to enter into what is a marriage. Jesus reiterates this. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 19, he speaks about eunuchs and talks about them being incapable of marriage. Now, a eunuch was a royal servant to the queen who was castrated, and so he was impotent and as a result incapable of the sexual act. Now, Jesus says that these eunuchs are incapable of marriage. Well, why would a person be incapable of marriage? It's because they're unable to speak the wedding vows with their body. They might be able to say them with their words, but their bodies are incapable of exchanging the one flesh union, as would be the case with two women or two men or a husband and a wife constantly contracepting the possibility of consummating their union. But I think the bigger problem behind all of this is that for the first time in history, we're creating motherless children. We're creating fatherless children. And this is not going to fare well. And the sociologist may argue, oh, no, it's all the same. All the lesbian couples, everyone's going to do just fine, right? We've got all these studies, so to speak. But the fact is, for decades before gay marriage was even an issue, there was mountains of sociological data showing that children fare best when they are raised by their biological mothers and fathers than in any other domestic arrangement, whether it be foster parenting, step parenting, adoptive parenting, single parenting, you name it, biological mom and dad, everything fared better under that arrangement. But then when gay marriage was on the scene, it's almost like all that data disappeared and people said, oh yeah, two guys, two mothers, two whatever, they do just as well either way. But if that's the case, then what is that secret ingredient that like two men or two women could offer that adoptive heterosexual couples couldn't offer, or foster parents couldn't offer, single parents couldn't offer? It just all of a sudden leapfrogged all of this data to an equal playing field. It's selective science is what it is. And there's plenty of research. If you go to our website, chastity.com, we'll show you the studies that they do not fare the same. And you don't even need to look at the data. You just need to talk to the kids. In fact, there was a boy who's adopted by two men, and eventually they had to put the kid in counseling because by the time I think he was 4 or 5 years old, he kept asking them if they could buy a mom. How much would it cost? Could we just save up some money and buy a mom? What's going on is adults are placing their perceived notion they have a right to possess a child above the child's right to live in a relationship with his biological mother and father. And people say, well, isn't it better than that kid living in some foster care system, for the rest of his life? Well, Actually, I know many people done foster parenting, and they're fantastic human beings. Yeah, granted, there are some dysfunctional cases out there, but you can't build an ideal upon a dysfunction. What I'm saying is, like, you can't say, okay, well, what's best for the kids? Well, let's look at the worst situation and say, as long as it's better than that, we're good. No, you have to build civilizations upon ideals, which is what is the best arrangement for this child. Because, my wife, I'm sorry, she can't be replaced by a man. A mother is irreplaceable. I mean, my wife could not be replaced as the mother of her kids by an army of 1,000 men, let alone one. And I would hope she'd feel the same way in terms of my fatherhood to the kids, because it's not just about function, it's about the identity of a father and a mother, and a man can never be a mother. And if biologically, everybody that's ever existed on the planet is here because of the union of the sperm of a man and the egg of a woman, if that's what it takes to bring a child into this world, I think it's maybe an indication of what should be needed to rear that child as well by nature. And so when people hear this, I could understand someone who experiences these attractions, like, wait a minute, then I can never be a father, then I can never be a mother. What a cross this could be. Because in virtue of being a man, you're called to fatherhood. In virtue of being a woman, you're called to motherhood. But it doesn't need to be fulfilled necessarily in a biological manner. There could be spiritual motherhood, emotional, all different types of fraternal and maternal love that you can still express. And I knew a friend of mine, he said, look, I want to be a dad. And if the church is not going to let me marry another man and adopt kids, then I'm not going to listen to the church's teachings on chastity or anything else. And so, but eventually God, pressed upon his heart and opened up his mind to chastity. And he said, look, I'm not going to worry about 5 years from now, but I'm going to just focus on today. How does God want me to live today? And it was quite a journey, but it came to the point where he started to embrace chastity, and he found joy in it and intimacy with Christ and with others in a healthy way. And it's the weirdest thing. Years later, he emailed me and he's like, it's the weirdest thing. He's like, I was with some young adults and I felt this attraction to a woman. He said, I wasn't trying to pray the gay away. It just kind of happened because he was opening his heart. Now, I don't want to imply by this that if you just pray enough, your attractions will change. No, the measure of your holiness is not your attractions. Having same-sex attractions is not a sin. And to imply that if you get really holy, then your attractions are going to shift, we can't make that promise because attractions are not under the faculty of our wills. We can't flip that on and off like a light switch. Yeah, we can reinforce our attractions by our behavior, but the fact is that what matters isn't simply the attractions. What matters is the will. Do I trust God with my body? And obviously, it requires great faith to do this. But gay pride and gay shame aren't the only two options. There's also an option of chastity. And for us to bring this option to people, I think first we have to express a lot of sensitivity towards these individuals because they could have experienced a lot of persecution, rejection from their own family, from their faith community, in their schools, within their own families, and even with themselves, rejecting themselves, harming themselves with cutting. I mean, you never know what they've been through. And so we need to have that loving, receptive attitude and even ask their forgiveness on behalf of the church for the times that they have felt hurt or rejected by members in the church, because in many respects, our community may have failed them on many fronts. Second thing, to give them the truth in love. It's not one or the other. What's needed is compassionate orthodoxy together. Because to say, well, we just need to build a bridge to these individuals and welcome them on in. Of course, build a bridge. But we just got to make sure we're not building a dock, okay? A dock is a half-built bridge that leads people out in one direction, but then doesn't complete the journey. And if we simply say, hey, all are welcome in this place, but not give them the gospel, then we're just basically saying, like Jesus, has no one condemned you? Neither do I condemn you. Well, what's the rest of the verse? But go and sin no more. That's building the rest of the bridge. And obviously, it could create some tension and people might get upset. But I think what's needed is for that truth to be delivered in love. Because if we say, well, we just need to tolerate people. Nobody was created by God to be tolerated. These individuals were created by God in order to be loved. And we don't want to fall into a false compassion. In fact, one woman I read said this, and she experienced lesbian attractions, and she said, may I make just 2 requests? Love me, but remember, you can't be more merciful than God. It isn't mercy to affirm same-sex acts as good. Don't compromise truth. Help me to live in harmony with it. Because you know what? We're all broken in our own way. this I'm okay, you're okay stuff, that just isn't the gospel. But the fact is, all of us suffer concupiscence, which means darkened intellects, weakened wills, disordered appetites, and it manifests itself in a different way for all of us. And this is just the result of life after the fall. Now, in the beginning, God created us without original sin, but we're not in that era of human existence. We're in this era struggling with original sin. And so if someone says, well, I was born this way, well, we're born into original sin. And just because we have a desire doesn't mean that God condones our desire simply because we feel that. And oftentimes these individuals have been sold a false gospel, that chastity is a cruel, repressive, unhealthy, unnatural burden, when in reality it was St. John Paul II who said chastity is the sure way to happiness. And so I would encourage you to bring this happiness to them. Most importantly, not by what you say, but how you live. A friend of mine does evangelization, he was telling me, in gay and lesbian bars in Chicago. And when he first told me that, I'm like, wow, how does that go over? Would he like bring a catechism into a lesbian bar? I'm sure you're a real popular guy. And he said, no, he said, usually we just talk about like the White Sox or like Cubs, Bears, the weather, whatever. And I'm like, well, what do you talk about God? And he said, well, sometimes we just don't, and he said, because you don't always have to be the mouth of Christ. Sometimes you can just kind of be his ears and just listen to people's lives and their stories. He said, as a result of doing this, he said, I actually have gay male prostitutes calling my cell phone at 3:00 in the morning when they're thinking about committing suicide because they know that I'll listen to them. To me, this is authentic accompaniment, because the world tells people that, look, you either accept me and you affirm what I want to do, or if you will not accept me in my lifestyle, then you are abandoning me. So what's it going to be? Acceptance or abandonment? Neither one of those is the answer. The answer is accompaniment. And to do this, we can't come to them with a spirit of judgment. There is a saint, not a lot of people have heard of, called Saint Mark the Ascetic. Listen to this quote he says, "A humble and spiritually active man, when he reads the Holy Scriptures, will refer everything to himself and not to another." Guilty? I mean, don't we do that? Oh, this verse is perfect for her. Oh, this verse totally describes him. No, he says, if you're humble and spiritually active, you're going to point all that stuff at yourself. And so instead of treating people like projects that we need to fix, I think we need to have a little more humility, take an interest in their entire life. That person is a lot more than just their attractions. And if we express love to them as a person, then they'll realize they don't need to pin their dignity upon our acceptance of their behavior or their chosen lifestyle. And so take time to build that friendship. Welcome them into the church. Try to introduce them to ministries like Courage. There's another one I'd recommend you check out called Eden Invitation. At the end of the talk, I'll point you to a link where you can find all of these, because community is needed. Look, like we can live without sex, but we cannot as humans live without intimacy. And so if someone were to come to a realization that, look, God loves me, but that doesn't mean that he condones whatever I desire, and maybe he's asking me to let go of something, that could be a scary moment to be in. But if they have a faith community surrounding them with love, they're much more likely to realize that there's joy that can come through chastity if we just simply are willing to trust God with our bodies. But ultimately, it's not so much what we say, it's how we live. All of us are called to practice this virtue of chastity, whether you're married, priest, single, religious, whatever, and it's absolutely demanding. Without a doubt, it is. But it all comes down to, do I trust God with my body? Do I trust him with my past and the dumb mistakes I did? Do I trust him with my uncertain future? Do I trust him with my temptations and struggles and this and that? Trust him with all of that, and then it unleashes the blessings that he wants to give to you. And you might think, well, Jason, but all this is easy for you or me to say because we don't have these attractions. It's true, but I want to introduce you to people who actually do experience these attractions. And they've written things for our website and created videos for us that I want to share with you. And one of the things they point out is like, please don't call me gay. Okay, like gay is not who there's a gay Catholic and this kid is gay and that girl's lesbian. This is not Catholic language. It is not Catholic to talk about a person as gay, because gay is not who they are. As we said earlier, who they are is a son of God. And so that is not a gay person. It is a person who experiences same-sex attractions. The personhood needs to come first, and then a layer there, and then the attractions they experience, instead of clumping their very attractions into their identity. Because like in my bio that you might read with this, presentation on the website, it doesn't say our speaker today is Jason and he's straight. It's like, dude, come on. Like if I'm a book, my straightness is on page like 87, right? It's not the cover story. And so we need to get our own Catholic anthropology straight, that gay straight is not who we are, even if those attractions are consistent and persistent and so on. And so to help you show these individuals, others who have embraced the life of chastity, our website is chastity.com. And if you just go to chastity.com/SSA, so for same-sex attraction, you will find Desire of the Everlasting Hills, which is a tremendous movie of firsthand, experiences of people who live that lifestyle and then discover chastity. Same thing with the movie The Third Way. You'll have a link there to the Eden Invitation. Now, EdenInvitation.com is a great website, especially for young people, exposing them to the beauty of the church's teachings on this issue as explained by people who experience same-sex attractions and embrace chastity. A lot of people are familiar with Courage. Not as many people have learned about Eden Invitation yet, but it's an awesome ministry. Also, as I had mentioned, Courage. Their website is CourageRC, as in Roman Catholic. It's either .org or .com. And then lastly, we have a new podcast called Lust is Boring. And if you look at that on Spotify or iTunes or any of the major podcast platforms, you'll see that we just recently released an episode that goes a little deeper than this 20, 30-minute talk. And then also, we did an interview with a guy named Hudson where he shares for an hour and a half on the show his experience not only with same-sex attractions, but transgender inclinations. Share these files with other people so that they can see that God's plan for human love, even on these demanding issues, whether it's abortion and contraception, homosexuality, at the end of the day, it's good news because it's all the part of the gospel. And so I hope this has been helpful to you. But remember, as I'd mentioned in the beginning, it's not so much about slinging that perfect argument. It's about trying to be a little quieter and actually listening to these individuals. Because I hope when they walk away, if you have a conversation with someone over this issue, that they walk away feeling that you actually heard them. It's not so much like, I got to make sure to squeeze in that perfect argument. It's not, I want to just make sure when this conversation's over, that person knows that I truly and authentically listened to them. And I think if we can do that, that's the first step to true compassionate orthodoxy that they deserve. God bless you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.